The alarm goes off. 7 a.m. Monday morning. Something is pounding inside your skull. Slow, heavy, relentless. You force your eyes open. The room won't stop spinning. An empty glass still sits on your nightstand. Your phone lights up. Last night's photos are everywhere. There you are, laughing, smiling, looking happier than ever. And now, you can barely stand the sight of yourself. You make the same promise you've made before. Never again. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You've probably said those words more times than you can remember. Today, though, I want to show you something most people never realize. Because that crushing headache, that hollow feeling in your stomach, the nausea that refuses to become relief, none of it exists to punish you. Quite the opposite. It's the echo of an ancient survival system, a biological contract, one that was written into your DNA nearly 10 million years ago, long before cities, long before civilization, long before alcohol was something humans learned to make. Back then, there were no bars, no liquor stores, no hangovers. There wasn't even a word for drunk. There was only a forest, slowly dying. Food was disappearing. Fruit trees vanished one after another. And somewhere inside that collapsing world, a small group of starving apes faced an impossible decision. One choice would save them from extinction and quietly reshape the future of every human who would ever live. That choice was fermentation. Every drop of alcohol you've ever tasted can trace its story back to that moment, to an ancient gamble, one your ancestors placed with their lives. They won, but every victory comes with a price. The forest hadn't always looked like this. Once, it was an endless ocean of green, branches bent under the weight of ripe fruit. Food was everywhere. You didn't have to hunt for it. You simply reached out and took it. For millions of years, that was enough. Then the climate changed. The forests began to shrink. Season after season, the trees disappeared. The fruit became harder to find. What had once been effortless slowly became a fight for survival. For the first time, hunger wasn't an inconvenience. It was a death sentence hanging over an entire species. Then one day, a starving ape noticed something lying beneath the trees. Not a fresh piece of fruit, a rotten one. Its skin had turned dark. Its flesh was soft. A strange smell drifted from it. Not sweet, not pleasant, not familiar. The ape hesitated. It leaned closer, sniffed it. Every instinct whispered the same warning: don't eat it. But instinct has limits. Starvation doesn't. So it took a bite. And then, something extraordinary happened. Warmth spread through its body. Its muscles relaxed. Its mind felt different. The world became strangely lighter. For the first time in its life, the ape was intoxicated. But more importantly, it wasn't starving anymore. That spoiled fruit became the only meal it would find that day. A meal no one else wanted. A hidden food source, waiting on the forest floor. It sounds like an evolutionary miracle, and in many ways, it was. But miracles rarely come without consequences. Because alcohol doesn't just feed you, it changes you. The ape's movements slowed, its balance weakened, its senses became dull, its reactions lagged behind. In a forest where predators could emerge without warning, being drunk wasn't simply dangerous. It should have been fatal. Imagine standing alone among the tall grass. The air is silent, too silent. Then, two green eyes appear in the shadows, watching, waiting, moving closer. A predator has already made its decision. The only question left is whether you can survive yours. Before we find out what happened next, we need to answer a much bigger question. Why would evolution ever reward a creature for eating fermented fruit in the first place? Why risk intoxication just to eat something rotten? Because hidden inside that spoiled fruit was something far more valuable than flavor. It carried energy. Fresh fruit is rich in sugar, but fermentation begins breaking those sugars apart, transforming them into compounds the body can absorb remarkably quickly. In a world where every calorie could mean the difference between life and death, efficiency mattered. One fermented fruit could be worth more than an entire tree of untouched ones. And suddenly, what looked like decay became opportunity. Not everyone recognized it. Not everyone survived long enough to learn. Evolution doesn't care about fairness. It only asks one question. Did you survive long enough to have offspring? If the answer is no, nothing else matters. So the forest became a ruthless filter. Some apes learned to search for the fermented fruit scattered across the ground. Others ignored it. Some couldn't tolerate the alcohol at all. Others became so intoxicated they never recovered. One by one, they disappeared. Not because they were weaker, not because they were less intelligent. They simply couldn't adapt to a world that had changed faster than they could. The survivors were different. They accepted the risk. They embraced an entirely new food source. And somehow, they managed to wake up before becoming someone else's dinner. But how? Why did some recover from intoxication, while others never got the chance? The answer wasn't hidden in the forest. It was hidden inside their cells. Deep within every living cell, a microscopic instruction manual was quietly being copied. DNA. Billions of chemical letters, most never change. Occasionally, one does. And once in a great while, a tiny mistake changes everything. Roughly 10 million years ago, one of those accidents occurred. Inside a gene scientists now call ADH4. ADH4 produces an enzyme whose job is surprisingly simple: break down alcohol. Before that mutation, the enzyme worked, just painfully slowly. Imagine trying to empty a flooded basement with a teaspoon. Alcohol entered the body faster than it could possibly be cleared away. The result? Longer intoxication, slower reactions, more time lying helpless on the forest floor, more opportunities for predators to strike. Then came the mutation. One tiny alteration in genetic code, almost invisible, but its effect was extraordinary. The enzyme became dramatically more efficient. Instead of crawling, it raced. Scientists estimate that this new version processed alcohol up to 40 times faster than before. 40 times. Not a small improvement, an evolutionary leap. Now imagine two hungry apes eating the exact same fermented fruit. One carries the old version of the gene, the other, the new one. Minutes pass. The first grows weaker, its vision blurs. Its legs refuse to cooperate. The second sways, but only briefly. Its body is already dismantling the alcohol. Its mind begins to clear. Then, the bushes move. Those familiar green eyes appear once again. The predator lunges. One ape is still trapped inside its own intoxication. The other stumbles to its feet, turns, and runs. Not because it was stronger, not because it was braver, because somewhere inside its DNA, a tiny molecular machine was working just a little faster. Sometimes, the distance between extinction and survival is measured in milliseconds. And sometimes, history changes because of a single typo in a genetic code. Over thousands of generations, the pattern repeated itself, again and again and again. The apes that could handle fermented fruit survived. The ones that couldn't gradually vanished. Not overnight, not in some dramatic catastrophe, but through millions of tiny decisions made by nature itself. Every season, every famine, every close encounter with a predator. Evolution was keeping score. If your body couldn't process alcohol fast enough, you were less likely to live long enough to pass on your genes. If it could, you earned another chance, and another, until, eventually, that tiny genetic advantage stopped being rare. It became the norm. The descendants of those survivors inherited more than just stronger bodies. They inherited a craving, a subtle attraction to the smell of fermentation. What once smelled like spoiled food now smelled like opportunity. What others avoided, their brains learned to seek. It wasn't a conscious decision. It never is. Natural selection doesn't teach, it rewires. Generation after generation, that instinct grew stronger. Until one day, it wasn't just helping apes survive. It had become part of what it meant to be human. Now fast forward 10 million years. You're no longer standing in a dying rainforest. You're sitting on your couch. It's late. Your phone lights up. A friend sends a message. One drink tonight? You haven't planned to go out. You know you have work tomorrow. You remember the headache from last weekend. And yet, before you've even finished thinking, your thumb is already opening the chat. That impulse feels modern, but it isn't. The circuit that fired inside your brain a moment ago is astonishingly ancient. It's the same impulse that once drew a starving ape toward a pile of fermented fruit beneath the forest canopy. Not because alcohol existed, but because survival did. Your brain isn't chasing a cocktail. It's following an evolutionary shortcut that once pointed toward calories, toward opportunity, toward another day alive. For millions of years, that instinct was an advantage. It kept your ancestors alive when others starved. Evolution rewarded it, strengthened it, passed it on, and eventually passed it to you. So perhaps the better question isn't, why do humans drink? The more fascinating question is, why does something that once helped us survive still have such extraordinary power over us in a world where survival is no longer the problem? Because evolution has a habit of solving yesterday's crisis long after the world has already changed. Time moved on. The forests retreated. Open grasslands spread across the landscape. Then came a revolution. Not in technology, not in politics, in food. Human beings learned to plant seeds. We call it the birth of agriculture. And for a long time, we've told ourselves a very simple story. First, we learned to farm. Farming produced more grain than we could eat. So naturally, we turned the leftovers into alcohol. It sounds perfectly logical. There's just one problem. The archaeological evidence doesn't always agree. Over the last few decades, researchers have uncovered something unexpected. At many of humanity's earliest settlements, the oldest traces aren't ovens, they aren't bakeries, they aren't even signs of bread. Instead, they find residues left behind by fermentation. Ancient vats, brewing vessels, chemical fingerprints that point to alcohol. Again and again. It's led some archaeologists to ask a provocative question. What if we've been telling the story backwards? What if people didn't brew because they had extra grain? What if they grew grain because they wanted to brew? It's an idea that still sparks debate, but it's no longer a fringe hypothesis. Because alcohol offered our ancestors something far more valuable than simple intoxication. It solved problems that shaped civilization itself. The first was water. Today, turning on a faucet is effortless. For most of human history, clean drinking water was never guaranteed. A crystal-clear stream could still be filled with invisible bacteria. A quiet lake could carry deadly parasites. One drink could mean days of illness or death. Fermentation changed that. As yeast consumed sugar, the brewing process created an environment where many dangerous microorganisms simply couldn't survive. The result wasn't sterile by modern standards, but it was often safer than untreated water. Imagine standing in a prehistoric village. In one hand, a cup of river water. In the other, a lightly fermented drink. The cloudy brew might not look appealing, but it could be the healthier choice. Sometimes, the drink that made you slightly dizzy was also the one that kept you alive. But alcohol didn't just preserve bodies, It transformed relationships. Picture the scene. Night falls. A fire crackles beneath the open sky. A circle of strangers sits together. One vessel is passed from hand to hand. No one owns it. Everyone shares it. Something begins to change. Voices grow louder. Laughter comes easier. Suspicion softens. Stories begin. Ideas spread. Trust appears where silence once existed. Long before written language, long before governments, long before money, there was something remarkably powerful about sharing a drink. It turned individuals into groups, groups into communities, and communities into civilizations. That's why alcohol appears almost everywhere human history begins. At weddings, at harvest festivals, during religious rituals, at peace negotiations, even in mourning. It wasn't merely a beverage, it became a social technology, a chemical bridge between strangers, a catalyst for cooperation, a quiet force that helped human beings do something no other species has ever mastered on the same scale: build societies large enough to change the world. And yet, the very gift that helped create civilization would eventually become one of civilization's greatest burdens.